Mac Germans from Russia History Fellow and coordinator for the Germans from Russia Oral History Project. It is a pleasure to visit with Ruth Fischer in Gackle, North Dakota. Ruth, can you state your full name, including maiden name?
Ruth Dockter Fischer.
And when were you born?
I was born March 2nd, 1925.
And where?
At Streeter, North Dakota, out on the farm.
Did your parents ever tell you a story about your birth? Do you know if there was a doctor or was it a midwife or?
I think it was a midwife.
Okay. What was it like growing up on the prairie?
Well, I think with a sister and 5 brothers, we always had lots of things to do and get into.
Did you get into a lot of mischief then when you were a kid with your brothers and your sister?
Well, they took me along wherever they went, the brothers, and they liked to hunt, and they would take me along. Okay. And of course, they'd send me into the culverts to see if I could chase anything out for them. And I thought they really liked having me along. But today, I think I was their little gopher. But we did have fun being together anyway.
So are you the youngest, or?
I'm the second youngest.
Second youngest, okay. Can you tell me the order of your brothers and sisters?
Yes, there was Edwin, Arthur, Adam, Viola, Harold, Ruth, myself, and Howard.
What did you find especially beautiful about growing up on a farm?
I think families were closer at that time because you didn't have many things to go to. You were home most of the time.
Okay. Mm-hmm. How about what was unpleasant about it, or?
I think the terrible winters we had in those days. Lots and lots of snow. I remember my father building a little, it was like a little shed on a sled, and that's how he'd take the cream and eggs into town, which was 7 miles, and then he'd bring the groceries home. But it was in an enclosed, I don't know what they called them at that time. But.
So what was a typical winter like back then?
I'd say much colder and a lot more snow.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
A lot more blizzards, too.
How about a summer? What was a typical summer like?
Sometimes very hot, and we'd have lightning storms that were quite severe sometimes.
When you were growing up, what was your favorite time of year? What was your favorite season?
I think summer. Of course, winters were fun too. I mean, we'd go sledding, we'd go to the neighbors. My parents would hook up a team of horses and we'd go up and do some sleigh riding, and the parents would visit. And the next time the neighbors would come down with the kids and we'd go sledding, and we'd always have homemade ice cream, cake.
How far were the neighbors from your place?
Oh, well, I'd say about 3 miles.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
When you were growing up, did you know your grandparents?
I never knew my Dockter grandparents, but I did know the Schlinker grandparents.
Okay.
But they lived in Gackle, and we lived 7 miles northwest of Streeter. So I remember them. I mean, we'd go over and visit, and they'd come over to our house. But we never really were very, really, really close.
Okay.
I wasn't anyway. I know the older ones, they spent some time with them. And
did they live in town in Gackle then, or?
Yeah, at first they lived like 3.5 miles southwest of Gackle, and then they moved into town.
What was your grandpa? Was he a farmer or?
Yes, they were.
They were.
Hmm.
How would you describe your grandfather? What type of person was he?
He was kind of a quiet person, but yet he was always happy, and I don't know what else.
How about your grandmother? What type of person was your grandmother?
Well, I guess like most people in them days, hard workers and with a large family, and she was always busy with all those kids, and yet she did lots of crocheting and things. My mother still had a pillow that she had crocheted, and well, it was a pillow top, and then they put it into a picture frame, and still very beautiful today.
That's a treasure.
Mm-hmm.
How often would you get up to see them? Would it be a regular occurrence, like a weekly thing, like on Sundays, or was it just a once in a while?
It was a once in a while thing, yeah.
Did you ever stay with them when you were growing up?
I never stayed with them, but like my older siblings, they did when they were still out on the farm.
Did they come from Russia, your grandparents?
Yes, they did. Mm-hmm.
Did your grandparents speak any English, or did they strictly speak German?
No, they spoke English.
They spoke English.
Mm-hmm.
How many children did they have? You mentioned they had a large family.
Oh boy.
You can guess.
Can I look?
Yeah.
Now, where is it? Can I read their names or?
That's fine.
Okay. My grandparents had a son named William Schlenker, Gottfried Schlenker, Alexander Schlenker, Edward Schlenker, Theodore Schlenker, John Schlenker, Julia Schlenker, Elsie Schlenker, Catherine Schlenker, Paul Schlenker.
So 10 children.
10. It's a big family.
Huge family.
Oh, and there was Matilda, my mother.
Oh yeah, so 11.
Yeah. Yeah.
Most important.
Yeah, and they, my mother remembered the trip when they came over to the United States.
How old was she when they came
She
over?
was 7.
She was 7. Okay.
Mm-hmm. And she said people were so ill on the ship, you know, and when they got to Ellis Island, two of her a little brother and a little sister were sick. The little girl was 2, and the little boy was 6 months old, and they ended up in the hospital where they both passed away. And my grandfather, he had sore eyes when they came to New York, and they kept him there for 4 months. And Grandma Schlenker took the children from New York and went down to Culm, North Dakota, where she rented a farm and bought cattle and horses. And in 4 months, when Grandpa John Schlenker came back, they moved to Gackle, about 3.5 miles southwest of Gackle. So.
Do you know how old the oldest child was when your when they came over to Russia or
I think the way my mother said, well, he was the oldest one. Mm. Well, I know she could do some farming because some of the boys were old enough, like 17 and 18.
Okay, so she had some help then with the
Yes,
older
she
sons.
did.
Okay. So that's pretty amazing to be a woman to,
Yeah.
come
They,
over with a large family.
they must have been very strong too.
Yeah.
Well, some of the Schlinker children were born here in Gackle too.
Oh.
They weren't all born over there.
Okay. What type of farmers were your grandparents? Were they grain farmers?
Yes.
Farmers?
And milk cows like everybody did.
So a little bit of everything.
Yes, raising poultries and
Okay.
yeah.
Your grandparents on the other side, did you ever meet them, or you just?
No, my grandfather, Dockter, died in 1933, I believe.
Okay.
No, my grandpa, Michael Dockter, he died in 19, that isn't right. I know I don't remember him at all.
Okay.
And my grandmother, well, my parents, when they got married, they lived with Michael and Katharina, my grandparents. And when Grandpa Dockter died, Grandma Carolina stayed with my parents until 1926, when she was ill with cancer. She then went to her daughter, Carolina Dr. Klein, in Eureka, South Dakota.
Okay.
But my mother took care of Carolina for 11 years. They lived together. And she always said what a wonderful person she was. They never had a dispute or arguments. And my brother Eddie, he's the oldest, he still remembers reading in German to Grandma Carolina. Yeah. And when Carolina passed away, then my mother and father, August and Matilda, they bought the farm.
Okay. So, how old were you when your other grandparents passed away? Remember when they passed away?
The Schlinkers?
Your Schlinkers, yeah.
Yeah, I do know, but my grandfather, John Schlinker, passed away in 1947.
Okay.
And my grandmother Schlinker, Christina, passed away in 1963.
Growing up, were you close to your aunts and uncles? Did you know your aunts and uncles?
Yeah. There were 3 of the Schlinkers that moved to Montana. We didn't see those too many times. John came in to visit quite often. Julius, I didn't know him very well. And then my mother's sister, Katharina, or Catherine, she was here sometimes too.
Okay. Did you have an aunt or an uncle that you were particularly close to growing up, or?
Yeah, I think we were, anyway, Elra and I were really close to Paul and his wife Elsie.
Okay.
And also Alex was quite close too.
How would you describe them? If you think back, what were they like?
They were just common, ordinary, aunts and uncles, but we always had a very good time with them when we'd go there. Mm-hmm.
What types of things would you do when you went to visit them?
I think mostly visit.
Just visit?
Visit and, of course, have lunch.
Did you have lots of cousins growing up?
Yes, there were a lot of cousins.
Do you remember anyone being particularly close to you, or were they just family that you would see every once in a while?
Well, like the ones in Montana, we never did get to know really well. But these that lived around here in Gackle, we knew quite well. We'd get together, and of course, like kids, would have a good time.
Thinking back to your larger extended family, your grandparents, your aunts and uncles, cousins, was there any time growing up that the entire family would get together for a celebration or an event or anything?
Yes, some of my uncles, they got married later in life, and I remember when Alex got married, I think I was, oh, now I don't know how to say that. I stood up for them when they got married.
Okay.
I was a young lady at that time.
Okay. So you were in their wedding?
Yeah. And they usually had the wedding out on the farm home.
Oh, okay.
Not in a church, but in a home,
Okay.
in their home.
What was a typical wedding celebration like?
Well, they'd always have prepared a meal, a big meal, and they would usually have what they called in them days a charivari.
Oh, what is that?
Oh, after they were married and a group that wasn't in the wedding or invited, they'd have a charivari and make a bunch of noise with, I don't know, pails and pounding them and whatever, and then they would pass out a drink for them.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Never heard of that.
And lots of them had a barn dance or whatever after a wedding.
Okay. What would be the typical meals served at a wedding? What would be?
Well, they'd have like ham or even chicken and mashed potatoes and the whole thing, which was a lot of work.
Who would usually prepare the food for the weddings?
Who would prepare? Well, usually the parent, I'd say the mother,
Okay.
but she'd have help, of course, from neighbors or some of the family members. And
Let's see. When growing up, how did your family keep in touch with like your aunts and uncles that lived in Montana? Did they write letters or?
yeah, they'd write letters periodically.
Okay. Turning to your parents, when was your father born?
My father was born September 7th, 1892.
And when did he pass away?
He passed away January 7th, 1954. They came over also in 1903.
Okay, so when we find out his birthday, we can
Mm-hmm.
figure that out. Okay. How old was your father when he passed away?
63, I believe, yeah.
Okay.
They had just moved into town in the fall, and in January he passed away.
Oh, okay.
So he didn't enjoy much of,
Town life.
right.
Thinking back, how would you describe your father? What type of man was he?
He was He was a very fun person, and he could tell you stories, and of course his feet would move, his hands would move, and he was always happy.
Very animated person.
Yes, and he's the one who taught us how to play cards.
Really?
And in the evening we'd play cards, whist and pinochle and other games. And on very hot days, why, after we were all done with our chores, he'd take us, Mother and Dad would take us over to Salt Lake for a refreshing swim.
We just went out there 2 days ago to take some pictures. It's a lovely area. Different from what it used to be. Did your father show a lot of affection towards the children? Was he an affectionate man?
Yes, but he was strict too. I mean,
how would your father express his anger when he got upset with the children?
well, I think he'd warn us first. And we were disciplined. I mean, like we'd get a swat once in a while.
Stepped out of line.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Would you say you were close to your father when you were growing up?
I would say, yes.
Okay. What type of work did your father do? Was he a farmer as well?
He was a farmer. He also butchered for many of the neighbors.
Okay.
He was great for butchering, so they always asked him to do that.
Okay.
He also liked to work with wood. Some Christmases, when in those days there wasn't much money, he would make things for Christmas gifts for the kids.
Do you remember anything that he made you when you were growing up?
No, I really don't, but I remember making little wagons and different things. I think we had to share some of the things.
Okay. How about your mother? When was she born?
My mother was born July 31st, 1895.
And when did she pass away?
She passed away in March 29th, 2001.
And she was born, you said she was born in Russia as well, right?
Yes.
She came over when she was 7?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How old was she when she died?
She was 4 months less than 106.
How would you describe your mom?
My mother was a very hard worker, of course, with 7 children, and with the parents made 9 people to feed. She worked out in the field a lot and helped make hay. And I remember when she'd make a big batch of bread dough in those great big bowls, you know, and before she'd go to the field. And my sister Vi, she was 9 years old, and then she had to take care of the bread. She'd knead it down and put it in the pans and bake it.
And that was, last thing I think you mentioned, and that's because she had a lot of allergies to out in the field or something, that she would get ill. Is that why Vi stayed back and did a lot of the baking? Or?
No.
Okay.
I also remember Vi was 11 at the time and I was 7. We'd take a lunch out to the fields. We'd ride horseback and carry all the food with us. And on the way back, I got a terrible pain on my side, and I couldn't finish riding home. I had to walk, and I had an appendix attack.
Oh, no.
So that night, when they all came from the field, at that time, Dr. Stokes had an office over at Salt Lake, too. So they drove me over there, and he told them what it was, and away we went to the hospital. Well, they kept you quite long in them days. I'd say around 7 days or something.
And they removed your appendix?
Yes.
Scary. How would your mom express anger when she got upset with the children?
Well, sometimes she'd say, wait until Pa comes home.
Growing up, were you close to your mother?
Yes.
Yeah. Was she an easy person to talk to?
Yes.
Let's see here. She had 7 children. What did they hope you would be when you grew up? Did they have
Well,
aspirations for you that they?
not really. Just my father always said he don't care what church you're going to, but go to church. We were brought up Lutheran, but he said you don't have to stay in the Lutheran faith, but go to church when you're grown up, or as you grow up and later on.
Were your grandparents Lutheran as well?
They were, the Schlinker grandparents were Lutheran, and then later on they went to the Congregational Church.
Thinking back, when you think about your mother and father, who would you say was the strict one, the one that set the laws of the house?
I would say my father.
Father. So when your mother warned you, when your father gets home, that was...
That was a good clue.
Shape up before he gets home.
Right, that's right.
When you think about your parents as a couple, how would you describe their marriage?
I think it was good marriage. I mean, my mother helped, like I said, out in the field, and he also helped in the house, helping with things. In those days, they didn't have, like, with washing clothes, he bought her a washing machine with a motor on it, a little gas motor, and of course he'd have to vent it out of a window for her.
Okay.
And there were many clothes with 9 people.
Yeah, I think laundry would be nonstop.
Yeah, yeah.
When your parents weren't working, what types of things did they do? What type of pastime activities would they do?
Well, they went visiting quite often, and the neighbors would come down there, and in those days they seemed like everyone liked to play cards. The parents would play cards, and of course we were playing games, being very noisy. And
Do you remember what types of games you would play?
yeah, like I Spy, Blindman's Buff, and
What's Blindsman's Buff?
well, you had to tie your eyes shut, and then you were supposed to find these. They were hiding in every corner. You were supposed to find someone, and then just by feel of their face and things, know who it was.
Oh.
Yeah.
Were you good at that game?
Well, sometimes.
And how would you play I Spy?
Well, you'd the one they'd call it, you're it. So you'd have a button or some other thing, and the rest would have to leave the room, and you hid this thing.
Oh.
So when they'd come in and they'd want to find it, if they were far away from it, you would say, you're cold. And the closer they got, they were warmer.
Okay.
And of course, when they got really near, you said, you're hot.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Tell me about your brothers and sisters. What type of people were they? Or kids were they?
Well, I think we all got along pretty well. Sometimes, of course, like all kids, fight and disagree. But all in all, I think we got along quite well.
What was with 7 kids, what was the age separation between the oldest and the youngest?
The 2 oldest were 1 year apart,
Okay.
and all the rest were 2 years apart.
Okay, so you're relatively close in age then. Okay. Were they all born in the Streeter area?
Yes, they were. Mm-hmm.
Were there any interesting stories about any of their births that was kind of unique or different?
Yeah, my oldest brother, I forget what he weighed, like 4.5 pounds or something like that. And I remember my mother telling how they had him he was so tiny, they had him in a shoebox and set him on like an old cook stove range. He'd set him on there so he'd keep warm.
Huh.
He was so small.
Being so close in age, was there a lot of competition between your brothers and sisters? Did you guys compete in activities
Well, I don't think we had any. Well, we liked to play baseball and stuff, but competing in different things, I don't remember doing that.
What type of mischief would you get into with your brothers and sisters? What types of things did you do that got you in trouble?
Well, my father raised a lot of sheep, and of course we'd kind of tease the sheep buck. We'd fill a bag of hay and tease him that way, and then he'd come running after you. And one day when my dad was carrying a couple pails of milk to feed some calves, the sheep buck came up behind him, and the milk was flying every direction. And he wondered why the sheep buck would be mean.
Oh my goodness. What types of things would you and your brothers and sisters do if your parents left you home alone?
Oh boy. Well, I guess I know we tore around the house more than we would otherwise. I remember my youngest brother Howard and we broke the window on a kitchen cabinet, and we were tearing around with Vi, and well, we accidentally broke it.
What did your mom think of that when she got?
Oh, she wasn't too happy with that.
When you were growing up, did you have a brother or sister that you were closest to?
I suppose I'd have to say Howard, because he was next to me, and of course, I guess we were all close. My brother Eddie, still today, he checks over here every once in a while how we're doing and stuff.
Is that your oldest brother?
Yes.
He's the one that stopped by when you were How would you describe Howard when you were growing up? What type of boy was he?
He was kind of mischievous one.
What about Eddie? What type of older brother was he?
Well, him and I are like 9 years apart.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. But he was always, he left to go to the CCs and things, so he wasn't home that much. And then, of course, after that, he moved to a farm where he was alone, and then he went in the army, so he was away quite a bit too.
Okay. of your other brothers and sisters not live with you when you were growing up because they had moved out? Or?
Well, like Adam, he went to Michigan. My dad, my aunt, Lena Perkins, she owned a cafe down there, and he went down there to work for her. And when he got ill down there, and then my parents went down and got him. I don't remember. I think he must have been about 17 years old when he went down there.
Okay. You said he got ill when he was down there?
Yeah.
What did he?
He had a heart condition. I know my other brothers were all in the service except him. He didn't pass to go into the service.
Okay. Thinking back to your childhood, how would you describe your family's house? If you think about what it looked like, how many rooms did it have, and what was the setup of it?
It had, I believe, 6 rooms, so you know the kids didn't have separate bedrooms, that's for sure.
How many kids per room was there?
I think there was 5 boys in one room,
Okay.
and then my sister and I had a room.
Okay. Did you each have your own bed, or would you share beds?
We had to share a bed.
Share a bed.
Mm-hmm.
Was it a one-story or?
It was a one-story. Mm-hmm.
How would you heat the house?
It was a coal stove. Of course, in the living room.
Did the house stay pretty warm, or would it get?
Well, it stayed pretty warm, but by morning it was quite cold already.
Did you have a basement?
Yes.
Okay. Let's see here. What was the furniture like in the whole house? What type of furniture do you have?
Well, all in the old-time style, of course. And we had a record player with a spring winder up that you could put records on. And
how long did your parents reside in that home? How long did they live there?
they lived there till when my father passed away. What was it? I had that wrote up somewhere.
Until they moved.
53. He died in 53.
Yeah, they moved into Streeter in 53, and then my dad must have passed away in January of 54.
So is the old farmhouse still standing, or
No, that was torn down now. Mm-hmm.
is your father's land still in the family, or was that sold? Or?
That was, we just sold the last when my mother passed away.
Let's see here. When you were growing up, did your family have any nicknames? Your brothers and sisters, or you? Did you have any nicknames growing up?
My sister, they called her Oli. I maybe shouldn't have said that.
How'd she get that nickname?
I think one of the neighbors gave her that name.
Okay.
I think some of them still call her that today.
What language did your family speak at home?
Well, they spoke a lot of German language, but we all learned to speak the English, where we still have the old brogue, I suppose.
When you were a child, what were your responsibilities in the house? What were some of your chores that you had to do?
Well, wash dishes, that was a never-ending thing. And of course, helped with the washing. There was no dryers or anything. You had to hang everything outside.
Okay.
I remember how the clothes would be hanging on the line in the wintertime. They looked like a piece of metal hanging there, you know.
You can imagine.
Yeah, so.
Would the boys help with at all with any of the household chores?
Well, I remember when I was going to school, the Art and Adam, when we'd come home, if my parents would leave for the day or something, they would have a nice meal prepared, evening meal. They'd even bake a pie and whatever.
So did your mom teach them how to cook?
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Of course, the one time Art wanted to clean up the kitchen real nice, and he happened to poke the broomstick through the window.
Accident prone with glass, I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Did your mother have a large garden?
Yes, she did.
What types of things would she grow in the garden?
Well, she grew all the vegetables and potatoes and the whole thing. We'd harvest that all summer, you know, for meals. And she did a lot of canning, too.
Okay. Did the children have to help a lot to take care of the garden? And
Oh, yes.
Did you help your mom with the canning process?
Yes, whatever I was able to do, you know, we'd all have to, like, clean up the vegetables, and she'd can a lot of meats and things, too.
Did your father help around the house with some household tasks?
Yeah, he was quite handy, too, in the house. He'd help Mom.
What types of things would he do to help out around the house?
Well, like when there was house cleaning, he'd help hang out all kinds of beddings and things like that. And
What were some of the outdoor responsibilities that you had as a child? Some of the outdoor chores?
well, after school, I remember Howard and we'd have to haul the water up from the well with a cream can on a sled.
How far was the well from the house?
Well, maybe a block, I'd say, something like that.
Okay. What other types of things would you have to do outside?
Well, when I was older, I would have to go out, and I know Arthur would be hauling hay home with the hay rack, and I would have to go along with him and kind of set the hay around and tramp it down so he got more on.
Okay. How about your mother? What was some of her outdoor responsibilities that she had to take care of?
Well, besides the garden, she helped put in the crops. She helped make hay and things like that, too.
What chores did you really dislike doing? You just did not want to do?
Well, I thought it was great being outdoors all the time until I got older when I wanted to go places. I didn't think that was so great then. I remember when we were thrashing one time, I don't really remember how old I was, like 14, 15. My dad filled a wagon box full of wheat and a team of horses on that, and I hauled that into Streeter, 7 miles, and then when I had that unloaded, I loaded up, well, I didn't do it, but brought a load of coal home. Well, by that time, the horses were very tired, and one of them didn't want to go anymore, and it wasn't a lot of fun, and then it started raining.
Oh, no. Made for a long day?
It made a long day.
What were some of the differences between your summer work and your winter work? What changed with chores and responsibilities?
Well, there was no garden then to have to work in that and put all the vegetables and things away, but we still had to cart the water up, and the older boys would help with the milking and the feeding of livestock, and of course then Vi would be helping prepare the evening meal. I did too at that time.
Did your family ever go on a family outing, like fishing or anything like that, like a picnic or anything?
Well, to Salt Lake we did.
To Salt Lake?
Yeah.
What were they like? What was it like going up there?
A lot of fun. Well, now you wouldn't think that they had a roller skating pavilion and all that over at Salt Lake when we were growing up. And they'd have 4th of July doings over there, and they did boating at that time. And they also had a airplane flying over, and then they'd have someone jump out with a parachute.
Oh my goodness.
Of course, one time they gave everybody a scare. They let a dummy out with the parachute, and everyone thought this person drowned, you know.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, that could give everybody a pretty big scare. How often would your family go up to Salt Lake?
Well, not so terribly many times, but during the summer when it was real hot and we were all tired and worked hard, they would treat us to a swim. We thought it was great too when our dad bought a battery-operated radio. And of course, I think that benefited my father too, because when chore time came, he always said, "Hurry and do your chores so you can get in and listen to your programs."
How old were you when you bought the radio?
I really can't say. But I remember listening to different things.
Do you remember what programs you
Oh, like
liked?
real interesting ones. Lone Ranger or Little Orphan Annie, and they switched the stations to some polka music, and
Sounds like a good time.
Amos and Andy.
yeah.
When you were growing up, who did you primarily play with as a child? Who would you do different types of games with and hang out with?
I suppose I'd have to say Howard and Harold.
Did your mother and father ever play with you when you were a child? Did they play games with you?
Yes.
Yeah. What types of games would they play with you?
Well, they'd play cards with us kids, and my father liked playing baseball too, and he'd play with the boys, and of course I was the one that liked baseball too.
So would you describe yourself then as a tomboy growing up?
Oh yeah, I rode horse every day, getting cows or getting the mail. Our mailbox must have been about 1.5 miles from the farm.
Okay. Was that something you wanted to do, go and get the mail, or something that...
Yeah, because I loved horseback riding. And of course we went herding the cattle in them days when it was, the pastures were getting dry and not enough things to eat, so we'd have to take them out of the pastures, and we'd have to stay out all day herding them. Milking time, of course, we could come home.
Did you ride bareback then, or did
Yes.
you have a saddle? Or
No, bareback, yeah.
You mentioned playing cards inside. What other type of indoor activities would you do as a child? Do you have any other?
Besides cards.
Mm-hmm.
Well, there weren't too many books to read, but of course, when we go to Sunday school, we always would get some. When I started Sunday school, I started in the German language.
Okay.
So we'd always get a little card every Sunday that we had to memorize a Bible verse by the next Sunday.
Okay. So you practice your Bible verses?
Yeah.
What type of outdoor games did you play as a child? You mentioned baseball or softball.
Hide and seek, what am I saying? Well, the boys, they had a lot of fun riding the steers outside.
Really?
I
Did you
didn't
ever
participate
venture?
in that.
Never tried that one?
I never tried that one.
um, what was your favorite place to play when you were growing up? Your favorite place to go and play?
Well, there was an attic up our house. We liked to go up there. There was lots of things up there that we could get into.
When you were growing up, did you have any pets?
Yes, we had a lot of sheep, so we each had a lamb of our own
Okay.
that we'd have to feed and take care of. And I didn't like that job because a lot of times there would probably be 7 or more lambs in one little building, and it was a building that you had to sit in to feed them. You'd have to feed them by bottle, feed them some milk, and by the time you got out of there, they had your clothes full of milk and whatever.
A messy job?
Messy job.
When you were growing up, do you remember any favorite childhood stories that your parents would tell you, or fairy tales that you grew up with?
Well, I can't really remember any. I think what sticks in my mind most was when they came over from Russia, the stories that were told.
Your mom and dad would tell you stories about their journey. Did you grow up with any superstitions or scary stories?
Well, a lot of times when Vi and I were home alone, we always heard different noises, in the basement or somewhere. And there wasn't anything.
Always made your skin crawl just a little?
Right, yeah.
Did you grow up with any favorite songs when you were growing up? Did you have a favorite song as a child?
Yeah, South of the Border.
South of the Border?
I had to sing that for my little cousin.
Oh.
So I remember that.
Did anyone in your family play a musical instrument?
Yes, Harold played banjo and the ukulele.
Really?
And I wanted to take piano lessons so bad. We had an old piano. I learned to play different songs just by the sound.
Huh. Did Harold take lessons for the banjo and the
No,
ukulele?
he didn't.
He was self-taught as well?
Mm-hmm. There were several boys in school that played different guitar and banjo and things.
Did you ever learn how to read music, or your brother? Did he ever learn to read music?
No.
You mentioned going hunting with your brothers. What type of hunting would you guys do?
Well, I think they hunted anything that was moving.
How about fishing? Did your family go fishing?
I don't remember going fishing.
How often did you go to church when you were a child? Was it every Sunday?
Yes, when we were able to get out, unless we were snowed in or something.
Okay.
Otherwise, we did.
And you said that you were raised Lutheran.
Mm-hmm.
How important was religion to your parents? Was it?
I'd say very important.
What were some of the religious activities that you participated in during your childhood?
Well, Sunday school and like Christmas programs, and of course going to confirmation school. In those days they had it like, I believe, 2 weeks or more even.
Okay. How old were you when you went through confirmation?
I think I must have been about 15, 16, something like that.
Okay.
My brother Harold and I were confirmed together.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
What did you have to do for confirmation?
Lots of memory work.
What was the day of confirmation? Can you describe the day when you had to get up in front of the congregation?
Oh, that was hard. The pastor would ask you certain passages or certain things that you had to get up and recite it in front of the whole congregation and many guests that would come for confirmation.
How about Sunday school? What was Sunday school like?
Well, it was kind of close to what Sunday schools are now, except that you had to memorize a passage of some kind for the next Sunday.
Okay. When you think back to the pastor for your confirmation classes, how would you describe him? Was he a strict pastor, or was he approachable, or?
He was a young man and very, I thought, he was very, he expected you to learn everything that you were supposed to be learning, and yet he was a very nice man, and a very young man yet. He was not married at the time. In fact, he confirmed me, he married Elra and I, and he also baptized our first child, June.
Huh. So was he at the same church all that time, or?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. After confirmation, did your family have a special celebration for you and Harold?
Yes.
Yeah. What was that like?
Well, a big meal as usual, and then relatives were invited. And,
Okay.
mm-hmm.
Let's see here. Were there any things that your parents restricted because of their religious beliefs?
No, I can't remember of any. They let us go out to dances and like roller skating and all those things, but they wanted you to behave like good children are supposed to.
Thinking back to Sundays during your childhood, was Sunday dinner different than a typical dinner?
Yeah, I think it was a little more things that we didn't make for everyday meals.
What would you say is a typical Sunday meal?
Well, it was usually mashed potatoes and gravy with a certain kind of meat, and like pigs in blanket, and of course something special was baked, like pies, where we usually would eat cookies and cakes and things.
Okay. Let's see here. Where was the nearest church from your house?
Well, in street or 7 miles away.
7 miles. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned that when you started when you went to church, it was in German. Did you go through confirmation in German?
No, that was English for me. Mm-hmm.
Do you remember what it was like when the church switched from German language to English language? How was that transition?
I think it was very hard for the older people, but I could read everything in German. I wouldn't want to read right now, but
I won't hand you anything. What was a typical funeral like?
It was a lot different than now, I think.
Okay.
I remember when our neighbor man had passed away, they didn't even take him out of the home. They had him in a bedroom, and that's where he was until he was buried.
Oh. So they had the casket and everything in the bed.
Mm-hmm.
How would people find out about a funeral back then? How would the word spread to inform everybody?
Well, sometime, I think even by horseback when the snow was too heavy to travel with a vehicle.
Let's see here. What was your favorite holiday growing up?
I think Christmas.
What was Christmas like? How did your family celebrate?
Well, at Christmas time, my dad and mother would hitch up a team of horses too. My dad would fill the sled with hay, and Mother would pack us all in there and cover us with blankets, and when we'd get to church, he'd unhitch the horses, tie them to the sled. When it was time to go home, the horses had almost eaten all the hay out of there. But, and I know it was Christmas Day when we would have a tree, and they would put some candles on. They were those little tiny candles with a little clip, and they'd light them, and we'd all sit around the tree and sing Christmas songs. Yeah, and then, but when the singing was over, there were no more candles. They were out. Yeah.
Who would you celebrate Christmas with? Was it just your immediate family, or would your grandparents come over?
Sometimes. I don't remember much of my grandparents coming over for Christmas. They'd come over for visiting, and that was usually on the Sunday when they would come.
You mentioned that with your religious activities that you would participate in the Christmas program at church. What was a typical Christmas program?
Well, it usually was with you had to recite little Christmas things, and they, of course, it all centered on Jesus. And
did your family do anything for Christmas Eve? To celebrate Christmas Eve at all?
well, that's usually when the church program was on a Christmas Eve.
Oh, okay, so you'd go to that Christmas Eve.
Mm-hmm.
What types of gifts would you get for Christmas, or would you get gifts for Christmas?
Well, when we were all growing up, we would be happy to get fruit and the Christmas goodies, what we do have, now. But as far as gifts, a lot of them would be like homemade things.
What was a traditional Christmas dinner? What did that consist of?
Well, that would be like a stuffed goose or turkey. My parents would raise all those poultry things.
How did your family celebrate Easter?
Well, it was similar like doing Christmas. They'd have a nice meal, and go to church, and then have a nice meal, and probably have a few people in. And of course, coloring eggs, and of course they didn't color them. The Easter Bunny colored them,
What was 4th of July like? How would you celebrate 4th of July?
Well, most every small town had a little celebration, and it was just fun to to be there with kids your own age and things.
You'd have races, foot races, and kinds of stuff.
Yeah, activities for the young people.
What town would you go to Streeter then?
Yeah.
Streeter. How did your family celebrate?
Race.
How did your family celebrate birthdays?
Well, we'd have ice cream. I remember that. Not anything like a really special thing,
Okay.
but we'd always they'd always remember each one's birthday.
You mentioned before that your father did a lot of butchering. Did your family participate in like butchering parties where they'd have people come over?
Yes.
Okay, what was that like?
Well, for one thing, it was a lot of work and messy work.
Did you ever help out?
Yes, like with mostly the cleaning part.
How about sausage parties? Would they have a lot of people come over to help make sausage?
Yes, there'd be some neighbors there that the same people that my father went to help butcher all the time. They'd come back and help out too.
Did you help with that process as well?
I did help my father clean casings for the sausages.
Okay. Who usually prepared the meals in your family?
I suppose Mother, with the help of the girls.
You'd mentioned that your two brothers would sometimes cook some meals. Did your father ever help in the kitchen?
Yes, he did, like cutting different meats and things, you know. Like your meat was stored anyway at our house during the real cold weather. It was wrapped real good, and then it was stored in the grain to keep frozen.
Really? Okay. I never heard that. Okay. When you guys would have a meal, did your family always sit together at a table
Yes.
and have a meal together? Was that something that would you have conversation over dinner, or was it always a silent meal, or?
Well, there was some talking, and of course, my sister and I would get giggling fits or something. I know we had to leave the table a couple times.
Really? Got too giggly?
Too giggly.
They were brats.
Describe a typical meal. Like, you would always eat together? What would they usually consist of? What types of foods were on the table?
Well, there was always some type of meat had to be, and of course potatoes. Or my mother made a lot of strudels, knipfla, käsknipfla, and of course she baked a lot of kuchen and things like that. I said we all like those foods today yet.
Growing up, what were some of your favorite foods?
I think I have to say the dough foods.
The dough foods? Traditional German foods?
Yeah, especially the strudels.
We tried strudel yesterday for the first time. It's really good.
Did you like it?
Oh, it was delicious. What were some of your least favorite foods?
Ooh.
Really just dreaded when your mom put it on the table.
I think in those days you learned to eat everything that was put in front of you.
Let's see here. Did your family make their own wine, beer, or root beer?
Yes, my father made beer all the time. Made some root beer.
Did you help with that process? How would they make root beer?
Well, I didn't help at that time, but I've made my own pop already.
Oh.
I don't know what I did one time. We were sleeping, and all of a sudden we heard this cracking noise, almost like a gun going off, and it was bottles bursting from the root beer. So we had to carry it out like you were carrying an explosive.
You feel like you were living in a city at that point? You didn't know what was going on. Oh my goodness. When you grew up, we've talked about your family's home. If you think about the farm that you grew up in, what other buildings were on the farm besides your house?
Well, a chicken coop and a garage, granaries, well, the barn, of course, where the milking was done and the horses were kept, and of course an outhouse.
Necessity. Was Streator the closest town?
Yes, it was. Mm-hmm.
And that was, you said, 7 miles?
7 miles.
How did your father gain possession of the land? Did he inherit it, or did he purchase it?
He purchased it after his mother passed away.
Oh, okay, that's right.
Mm-hmm.
Would you say that your father was primarily a grain farmer, or was he more of a rancher, or a little bit of everything?
A little bit of everything. He did raise horses, and of course there was a lot of milking done, and then he had those sheep, 300 head of sheep.
So he had sheep, horses, cattle. Were there any other animals on the farm?
Sheep, horses, cattle. Oh yeah, that was a must. Of course, some hogs to butcher to make your sausage.
And you mentioned having goose at certain meals.
Yeah, we always raised like chicken and turkey and goose and ducks.
Okay. Let's see here. What were the roads like that led to your farm?
Terrible, if you'd call it even a road.
When it came to the fall harvest time, did the community of Streator have a celebration for fall harvest?
I don't think back in those days, I don't remember any.
Okay. How did your mother and father learn about farming practices back then? How did they keep up with the times in the farming industry?
Well, I think back then it was almost the same from one year to the other. Of course, nowadays, farming is completely different.
What type of farming equipment did your father and mother have?
Well, they had like the plows and the diggers, and of course the land always was what they called with the drags, whatever. They didn't have a thrashing machine. That the neighbor would come.
Okay, he would come over and help you.
Yeah, of course then it was a big crew that you'd have to feed till you were done.
What type of food would you take out to the thrashing crew when you and your sister would ride out to feed them?
Well, always sandwiches and some type of sweets and coffee. And
So if you thinking about thrashing season, what time would your family get up in the morning to start work?
like 4:30, you'd have to feed them breakfast too.
Okay.
Of course, they'd want eggs and meat and
The whole
everything.
9 hours?
Yeah.
And then they'd go out to the field. What time would you bring them out another meal?
I'd say about 9 o'clock we'd bring them some lunch.
Okay.
And then you'd rush back home trying to get the noon meal done.
And would you also take that meal out to them?
No,
when
they would
back?
come to the house to eat that.
Okay. When you're thinking back to the farm, how would you
Well, you mean in size or in grain look? Well, I thought they were, without using any fertilizer or anything like they do nowadays, I thought they were really nice crops. I remember going out and cultivating corn with a team of horses, and you'd have to sit on the cultivator, and your steering wheel was your feet in certain thing, and you had to watch so you didn't tear out the corn plant. You had to steer the
Oh, so it was very
shoes that were doing the cultivating.
Oh my goodness.
Had to use your feet to keep it going.
Needed good control over your feet then. What were the farm kids' feeling towards town kids? Did you view town kids differently than farm kids when you were growing up?
Well, I don't know. I think we all had friends, you know, that were from town, and I don't remember us ever being treated differently.
Okay. When you think back to Streeter, what did Streeter look like when you were growing up?
No, at that time I thought it really looked great.
What were the businesses what type of businesses were around when you grew up?
Well, there were like 2 grocery stores and 2 hardware stores and of course 2 liquor stores, I believe, and it's all gone, you know, backward a lot as far as businesses were concerned. And I think 2 garages and
How many churches were in town when you were growing up?
boy, I think at least 5.
Okay. Do you remember what denominations there were? There was a Lutheran church that you went to.
Evangelical.
Okay.
I don't know, was it Reform, I think, and
Catholic?
they had a Church of God or Church of Christ. I don't know.
Okay.
There was no Catholic church in
No Catholic
Streeter
church? Okay. Okay.
that I remember.
Let's see here. Would you ever go to town on a Saturday night when you were growing up?
Yeah, that was really a special deal.
What was Saturday night like in Streeter during your childhood?
Well, that was the night that you'd load up the cream and eggs and go to town and let out the kids to, I suppose, walk up and down and whatever.
Looking for boyfriends.
Scouting the town for boyfriends, huh? Do you, let's see here. How often would the kids take baths when you were growing up?
I guess we were kept pretty clean, but it was a struggle with all those people lugging water and heating it. And
what did you want to be when you grew up? When you think back to your childhood, what did you want to be when you grew up?
I think what I really wanted to do was go to school. And I wanted to play piano, I remember that. But that was not to be.
How old were you when you started school?
I'd say 6.
Okay. Where was the school in relation to your farm? How far away was it?
About 1.5 miles, or was it maybe a little further anyway.
Was it a country school?
Yes, it was a country school. And we
Schoolhouse?
1-room schoolhouse with a boys' cloakroom and a girls' cloakroom. Yeah.
What did the school look like? You walk in the door, and then where are things at when you walk in?
You walked in and there was a little hallway, and one side was a girls' cloakroom and on the other side was the boys.
Okay.
And you'd of course have to pack your own lunch to take to school. And cold winter days till you got to school, of course, it was frozen. Got to school, it was ice cold because, well, the teacher that taught school in that school there, she stayed with us a lot too, even with all our big family. And of course, then there was no fire going when we'd get to school, and we'd have to help her with coal. Well, the older ones helped her with the coal and wood and things that started up.
About how many students attended the school?
Well, there was about 5 families who went to that school, if I remember right.
Did you have the same teacher throughout the 8 grades?
No. No, we didn't. I didn't anyway have the same teacher. We had a lady teacher, and I remember we had a man teacher, and
how would you get to school?
walk
You'd walk?
most every day.
Did you ever ride your horse to school?
No,
No.
nope, never rode the horse to school. With that many in the family, we'd had to have a number of horses to drag.
That's true. Was attendance good in school? Was there regular attendance from kids, or would there be?
It was pretty good attendance. I remember when I went to school, there was one year I never missed one day.
Really?
Yeah.
Did your parents ever hold you out of school to help around the farm?
No, not that part. But like if it was a real bad blizzard, why they wouldn't let us go to school.
So it was too cold and snowy out.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Let's see here. When you think back, what was your favorite part about going to school?
I could say like kids say nowadays, recess.
Recess?
I think what we really looked forward to, they would have a Christmas program. The teacher would have a Christmas program in school, and we'd the kids would have to bring some bed sheets to make a stage curtain.
Okay.
And then we'd have a program for the parents, and we'd each have to bring a lunchbox filled with something to eat, pie or sandwiches and those things. And they would have an auction after the program, and the bidder who got the box would have to eat with the person whose name was on the box.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Huh. What subjects were taught when you were in school?
Like they say, reading, writing, arithmetic, whatever.
The basics? The three
Yeah,
basics?
yeah.
When you were going to school, who was your best friend at school? Who was the person that you hung out with the most?
I think Leona Handel.
Okay.
She was near my age, and
What types of things would you do with Leona at recess?
well, I guess we'd play play ball, and of course those days I think hide and seek was one of the games that they liked to play. And in the wintertime, we had a real big hill right off school,
Okay.
and you'd bring your sleds and you'd go sledding over the noon recess.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
How well did you do in school? Would you say you were a
Well, I don't want to brag, but I was a good student.
Oh, brag all you want. When you were in school, could you speak German, or was it strictly English?
Well, I think we spoke English because there were some children that didn't speak English at all.
Oh, okay.
So we spoke English.
Okay. Could you speak German at recess, or would that be something that the teachers would frown upon?
I really couldn't say with that.
Okay. Let's see. What type of school supplies did you need at that time when you were going to school?
Well, I guess paper and pencil and
Colors.
oh yeah, definitely colors.
Were there more males or females that went to school that were in your class, or was it about the same?
I think we had more girls than boys.
Okay.
Hmm.
Were there other ethnic groups, or was it just German Russian?
I don't remember what their name was Mandler. I don't remember what their nationality was really, but I know they didn't speak German.
Okay.
And then the Bergesons were,
Norwegian.
yeah, the Bergesons were Norwegian people. So we were kind of a mixed,
A mixed bunch?
yeah, mixed bunch.
Were the Norwegians and other ethnic groups accepted among the German Russians, or were there some children that would pick fun on them? Or?
I think we all got along pretty well because, well, the girls kind of hung out a lot together, and the boys also, and they were all close neighbors, so you better be getting along.
You mentioned taking your lunch to school. How would you take your lunch to school? What would you usually carry it in?
Well, in a syrup bucket, I guess. Syrup pail.
And what was a lunch meal? What did a lunch meal usually consist of?
I suppose like a sandwich, a cookie, and sometime a mother would send an apple, but of course till you got there it was frozen.
Yummy, frozen apples.
Yeah.
When you think about your teachers, how would you describe your teachers? Were they strict, or were they pretty approachable?
Well, I don't think they were terribly strict, but they didn't let you get away with everything either.
How did teachers discipline students at that time?
I can't remember. Were we all that good that we didn't need it?
Yeah, a class full of good students. Huh?
I remember sometime when our superintendent of county over the schools, would drop in. He wouldn't tell you when he'd come to school at all. And I think he was listening to see how good we were sometime. But he'd sit in on some classes, and when that was done, why he'd ask us to sing for him. Well, there were a couple of boys that played different guitar and banjo and things. So we'd entertain him for a while, and whenever he'd come, he would always ask us to perform in music for him.
So what would you do when he would come? What was your role? Would you sing, or?
Yeah, I didn't play an instrument. We all had to warble.
Do you remember, who was your favorite teacher? Out of all of your teachers you had, who was your favorite teacher?
I really can't say that.
Okay. Did you have homework when you were a child?
Not too terribly much. I mean, the teacher was really kept busy too, you know, with all 8 grades.
How would she do lessons with having 8 grades? How would...
Well, when she was doing 1 grade, you were doing your assignment, you know, and so you were pretty well caught up with everything without taking a lot of it home.
Okay.
Mhm.
So you had a lot of time to work on your...
Mhm.
When you did have to take homework home, would your brothers and sisters help you, or would you do it by yourself?
Yeah, if they were around, they would help out. Yeah.
Okay.
Mm.
How about your parents? Would they ever help out?
Yes, they would. Like if you had any reading material and stuff, they would help you with it.
What type of books did you read while you were in school? Do you remember any of the books that you had to read?
Oh boy. Like Dick and Jane.
Dick and Jane. What type of activities would you do during recess or noon hour? You mentioned you would sled in the wintertime.
Mhm. Playing ball, or sometimes you'd even have running races, or you know, things like that.
Were you good at the running races?
Yeah, I was quite speedy at that time.
You've mentioned that the school would celebrate Christmas. Did you also celebrate Valentine's Day while you were in school?
Yes.
What was that like?
Most of the time it was making your own homemade valentines in those times.
Okay.
Hmm.
How about Halloween? Would there be a celebration for Halloween?
Not that I remember.
Okay. Were there any other holidays that would be celebrated in school?
Well, sometime the teacher would make up another program, like towards spring, and then we'd have little playlets and stuff and have the parents come. And sometime, well, we had one of the fathers of the kids that went to school, he played violin and stuff, and he'd play violin afterward, and some would play banjo and different things, and sometime there would even be dancing in school.
Oh, fun. Okay. What grade did you complete through school?
8th grade.
8th grade.
Mm-hmm.
Did your parents need your help on the farm? Is that why you didn't go on to high school, or?
Yeah, and I think, well, we were 7 miles from town, which I would have had to board in town, or any of the other kids also would have had to board in town, because those times were no buses to pick you up.
How important was education to your parents? Did they want their children?
They would have liked to, I'm sure.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Besides your appendicitis, were there any other illnesses or injuries that you experienced when you were a child?
A broken arm at one time.
How'd you break your arm?
I think my cousin pulled my arm or something, and then I had a broken arm.
Oh, how did you get that fixed?
Well, Doc Stokes, I suppose.
Okay. How about your brothers and sisters? Was there any time when they were ill or injured when you were growing up?
Well, my brother Harold, he had pneumonia when he was around 16, I think, and he was very ill. I know Doc Stokes came out and he stayed right at the house.
Really? Okay.
Hmm. And at that time he made a mustard plaster, and he timed that, and he said that he can only leave it there for so long, and then he took it off.
How long did it take before he was better?
Oh, it was quite a spell till I know it was weeks before he was really getting his strength back.
Growing up, do you
I know she had some, but I can't tell you what they were.
Okay. Was it more common back then for children to be born at home, or with a midwife, or would parents go to a doctor?
I think midwife was common then.
Okay. Where was the closest doctor's office to your house?
Well, Dr. Stokes had an office in Streeter and also over at Salt Lake at that time.
Okay. Did anyone pass away during your childhood? Do you remember anybody close to you dying?
No, not really. I suppose some did, but I don't really remember.
Let's see. Oh yeah, growing up on a farm, did you ever get a feeling of like isolation, like you were alone?
No, not with that many around.
Not with the 7 kids and 2 parents?
Right.
You mentioned your neighbors lived fairly close. What were their names? The family name?
Well, there was Bergesons and Handels and Hofers.
Would they,
Showers.
Yeah, and Showers.
You mentioned that they would come over and help during threshing time. Was there any other time of the year that neighbors would help each other out?
Oh yeah, in those days, if someone was building a new building or something, all the neighbors would get together and help that person.
Okay. Did the neighbors ever look after you children for any reason when you were growing up? Did they ever babysit you or?
No, I would have older brothers and that would look after me anyway. I don't know about beginning, but.
Would you ever look after any of the neighbor kids when you were growing up?
Not that I can remember.
Okay. Growing up, today we have different social classes. You would consider somebody, middle class, lower class. Did those type of classes exist then? Did people qualify, fall into different class levels?
Not to my knowledge, really.
Just everybody was.
Yeah, people were more togetherness.
Okay. Were your parents interested in politics when you were growing up?
Somewhat, I think.
Okay. Oh yeah. Do you remember when your family first got a tractor? Like, how did that change the?
Well, that did change a lot compared to, working with the horses.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever get to use the tractor to help out, or?
I don't think I drove tractor at all till I was married, and then I drove tractor here. But
how about when the family got electricity? Do you remember that? The house got electricity, and how that changed the.
let's see, we didn't have electricity when I was still at home. There still was no electricity.
We first got electricity in 50.
Okay. So you never had it when you were at the home?
No.
How about a telephone? Did your family have a telephone?
No.
No? You talked about the radio and how that was exciting
Yeah.
for you growing up. How about movies? Did you ever go to a movie when you were a child?
Not when I was real young. I don't remember going to any movie.
Let's see here. Oh yeah. Who made your clothes? Did your mom make your clothes, or did you order them from a catalog?
Mother made a lot of the clothes.
Okay. Where would she get
I think ordered it from a catalog or something.
Montgomery Ward and Sears. Okay. Who did a lot? Did sewing? Or in your family? Did you do a lot of sewing or embroidery or quilting?
Yeah, mother taught us to embroider and things.
Okay. Did your family have a spinning wheel?
No.
No. Let's see here. Did your mom reuse old clothes to make new clothes from them, the material from old clothes?
Well, I remember her making a lot of clothes out of feed sacks. You know, they'd come in the flowered material and make aprons and blouses and things like that. Mm-hmm.
What was it like growing up in the dirty 30s, as the term has been
Yeah,
used?
that was terrible.
How did your mom try to minimize a dirty home?
Yeah, that was hard. I mean, you'd have sandstorms like snowstorms, you know.
Just like blizzards.
Oh my goodness.
And the ditches would be full of the soil that blew off the fields. And
Imagine that would feel lovely in your mouth.
yeah, right.
What was the most stressful childhood experience that you lived through?
I think when I had to go to the hospital and be away from everyone else.
Was anybody able to stay with you while you were up at the hospital, or were you by yourself?
I think my mother was there a day or two, and then.
What helped you get through that experience when you were a child?
I think it helped to get through it knowing that you'd be going home.
The end result was...
Right.
What was the scariest thing that you lived through during your childhood?
What should I say to that? I think it was scary when my mother was washing off in the kitchen and she was standing on the cook stove and she fell off, and then Dr. Stokes came and he ordered her to go to bed, and she said, well, I can't go to bed, I've got too much work to do. And he was a gentle doctor, and yet he was gruff. So he said, okay, lay there and die then, Matilda. He walked out. In 2 minutes he came back, and he was just so sweet and gentle.
Your mother sounds like she's a through and through German woman. I have too much work to do.
And another scary time, I think, was when my father had, at that time they called it sleeping sickness. It's something like, comes from the mosquitoes now.
Oh.
But he was real delirious and was very sick. And
How old were you when you had that?
I don't remember how old I was, but I can still see him there in the bedroom and was so delirious, seeing things on the wall and all those things.
Did Doc Stokes come out to help with that?
Yes.
What did they try to do for that?
I really don't remember if they gave him any kind of a medication or not.
Okay.
And I guess the most scary part was when my father passed away. He passed away at home in the house. And of course, the kids who lived around here were all there. And
what did he die from?
I guess lung cancer or
I can't say for sure, but he didn't, I know they called us in the middle of the night. They called in to Gackle. We didn't have a phone. I think it was Fred Wolf who came out here, wasn't it?
It seems to me.
Anyway, somebody came out and told us to get over to Streeter that he was very sick. So while we were there, he passed away.
Was he able to say goodbye to you before he...
Yeah, kind of.
Well, during your childhood, what was the happiest thing that you experienced? One of your best memories of your childhood?
I think there were many of them. I can't really point out a certain thing, really.
Okay. How about what was the most adventurous thing you did as a child?
Well, we thought it was really an adventure if you get to go to Jamestown.
Oh, did you get to go up there quite often?
Not very often, and then when we'd get there, why, my dad would go to the grocery store and get sometimes watermelon and something for a sandwich, bread and some meat, and we thought that was really a picnic.
What would you go up to Jamestown for, just as a family outing type of thing? Or?
Well, it was usually on business or shopping some things.
Okay. Is there anything else about your childhood that you would like to share?
Well, I think one thing, when Harold and Howard, they always liked to ride to the neighbors. And of course they wanted me to go along, and I said, no, I'm not going, because on the way up it would be fun. It wasn't so dark. But on the way home it's so dark. And I told them, then you guys will chase the horses so fast. They promised, no, we won't. Of course, when we got on the road home, guess what? That wasn't true.
You never trust boys?
Yeah.
Do you remember how World War II affected daily life in Streeter and on the farm?
Well, I really don't remember that, if we had anyone in World War II, you said.
Yeah.
Would that be when, no. I know Elra's father was in World War I, and I just can't recall that.
Do you remember if there was how rationing affected your family?
Oh yeah, I remember that. Sugar and like tires and different things that I guess you had to prove you needed those things in order for the people to get it.
Okay. Do you remember if the holidays were different during that time than before? Were they less? Did they change during World War II?
I really can't recall that.
Do you remember if other people around you thought differently of you because you spoke German during that time? There was different, the anti-German hysteria that was experienced during World War I?
I really can't think they did. I don't know.
Now here comes some fun questions. How did you meet Elroy?
Oh boy.
It wasn't easy or hard.
Well, I guess we met running up and down the streets.
About how old were you when you
I was
16.
17.
17.
Don't make me any younger.
How old were you when you two started dating or courting?
About 17 and a half, I suppose.
So shortly after you met.
Yeah, right.
What types of things would you do when you were courting?
Well, we went roller skating, to the movies.
Dancing.
Oh yeah, can't forget that.
What did your parents think about Roy?
Well, they liked him, but they said, you're way too young to get married.
How long did you date before you got married?
18. No.
I would say a year and a half.
Okay. So what year did you get married in?
In 1943
1943. And where did you get married?
at St. Luke's Lutheran Church in Streeter.
What was the wedding like?
Well, in those times, they still had stealing the bride's shoe and all those kind of things.
I've never heard of that
You
one.
didn't?
No, what was that?
Well, they'd steal your shoe and then they would auction it off.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
Huh. Never heard of that one. What other types of things did you have
Well,
at your wedding?
I know my parents had a big meal too for them, but we had it in Streeter in some kind of a hall. I don't remember what it was called, but
Okay. Was there a money dance at all?
I think there was, wasn't there? I don't. Yes, I guess there was.
Was there anything unusual about your guys' courtship or wedding that you would qualify as just unusual or a unique story?
Not that I can recall.
The roads were one thing.
The road.
Tough place to get to.
Oh yeah, traveling out to see her. After your wedding, did you have a honeymoon?
No.
No? Just back to life? Is there anything about wedding traditions or your wedding that you would like to add?
Oh, well, I know my mom made my veil.
Really?
Mm-hmm.
My mom made my veil for my wedding.
Yeah. But, you know, our first house that we lived in, that burned down and we lost everything in it. And then, of course, pictures and family treasures and like I still had my wedding dress and all the cards you received and everything.
And that was all in the house
And it was all in the house.
That happened in 54.
in 54?
Yeah, December 16th, that was. And then in 1986, lightning struck our house. And
What was
and
that like?
and took all of our appliances and well, right above me here was a 4-foot hole.
Oh my goodness.
And in the other bedroom was a 4-foot hole. And then the lightning came down, went in the basement, and went right through one of the basement windows, took everything out of it.
Oh my goodness. Goodness.
And of course, when I went downstairs, when this ball of fire came down, I was standing by the telephone on a rug, and the next thing I knew, I was laying in the other room by the shower. I couldn't figure out what the heck's this here shower. Why am I here?
Gosh, what happened?
Yeah, it's a terrible feeling.
Oh, I can imagine that.
Through your whole body, you got a really funny sensation.
That would be a unique thing
Yeah.
to experience.
And we're always grateful for family and friends who stood by us in those difficult times.
Yeah. When you had the fire in 50, you said 53, 54, 54. Where did you stay after your house burnt down?
Well, we moved a little two-room house out, and it was sitting out where the gate was a little bit to the north there.
Okay.
And that's where we stayed till this one was built.
Okay. Mm-hmm. How long did it take to build this house?
Oh, must have been at least a year, because the inside we mostly did ourselves, like the wall, sheetrock and those things, taping it, and in those days they taped the sheetrock in.
That's a process and a half.
I said, I don't want to build another house, that's for certain.
Why do you think it's important to record your life story?
Well, I think one day the kids will be more interested in that and want to know things. Well, by that time, maybe I won't be here. I'm too old, you know.
Want to pass on your memories?
Right.
Are there any other thoughts or observations that you would like to share with us today? That you can think of?
Well, I think I could add that we have been so fortunate in our families, not much of any sicknesses or deaths. We've been so very fortunate for that, and we're so thankful for that.